one of the things with marketing is that really good ideas, if ever they're exclusive for a short period of time. When something works, the odds are you're not the only one that had that idea at the same, at the same time. And people that didn't have the original idea with you, when they see it working, are going to copy what it is that you're doing. Almost everybody's on social media. So everybody will understandably feel like they have a good idea of how social media works. And they're not entirely wrong. But the difference between a social media manager and someone that's not a social media manager comes down to the amount of time the person that's a social media manager spends thinking about social media. And so what that looks like in real life is, if you're really good at what you do, you're a step or two steps ahead. So by the time the idea comes to you, it's not that it's stupid, it's just you've tried it and it didn't work. There is something to be said sometimes too for trying it again, trying it differently.
It's often said that, for things to be successful, you have to give it time. You don't do things and then just leave them halfway. Is there a way that you're able to balance this where it's like, we've tried this for 7 days. Should we wait to try it a bit more to see if there's something that sticks, or, let's just pack this up and move on?
I think there's a tension there, especially for young companies and marketers in positions where they need to prove themselves. You kind of have to figure out a way to marry the long-term necessities with the short-term necessities. And so there are very specific strategies that have no short-term impact. There are specific strategies that work better over a long period of time, but can show some short-term tracking, if you will. So this also comes down to some degree about your ability as a marketer or a marketing professional to present what it is that you want to do and what success looks like to the people who make the decision on whether you should go ahead or not go ahead. I think we need to have a conversation about the state of Nigerian influencers. It is a hot mess. So I feel like that is one thing that marketers are not talking about. And I'm not saying this to disparage influencers. I have heard of situations where the things that brands and marketers are asking influencers doesn't make any sense. It's not fundamentally creative, and I don't know whether that has now evolved into a position where influencers just incredible geniuses when they're putting out organic content. The moment it becomes a sponsored post, all the creativity, Steph Curry inside the basket, out the window. I think we're at the beginning of the end of the ability to outthink, because information now is commoditized and you're in a situation where everyone is fighting for attention. There's a saying I love so much: things that have never happened before happen all the time, and it's because in part they are just presented with shock and awe. So what I believe is important right now, if you're starting, even no matter where you are, to be honest, in the career ladder in a field like ours, is your ability to execute better than anybody else. Just period, point blank.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Craft, where we learn from senior leaders about the mindset, mentor models, and systems that shape how they work and lead. I'm Emmy, and I'm the creator and host. Our crafter for today is Ugo Iwuchukwu. Ugo has a passion for helping businesses grow their bottom line and has over a decade of experience driving measurable results across marketing, communications, and partnerships. He has played key roles in shaping brand narratives and go-to-market strategies for global brands and high-growth African startups alike. Notably, at Helium Health and Bamboo, both Y Combinator alumni, Ugo helped lead marketing, communications, and strategic partnerships, scaling customer acquisition and strengthening brand trust across multiple markets. His work sits at the intersection of creativity, data, and strategy, with a focus on building enduring brands that drive real business outcomes. Today, we talked about Bamboo's early days and all of the experiments that they ran, how long to let an idea run for before shutting it down, filtering the flood of ideas that I'm sure every marketer can relate to having at one point or the other. For early career leaders, how to prepare deeply, ask sharp questions, and add quality, not just volume, to the work that you do. The culture of dissent at Bamboo and how that has helped the team continue to do their best work. Why starting out in marketing is hard right now, but not impossible, and your only edge is how you execute, and how to master the business you're in, not just the channels. As you go through the episode, feel free to drop a comment and let me know your favorite parts. Subscribe so you know when new episodes drop, and share with a marketing professional in your network who might benefit from the conversation. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy.
Ugo, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me on the pod today.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So I have a bunch of things that I want to dig into today, because you've had a really long career, but you have had also a really good time really teaching the things that you have learned, whether that's, with your tweets, with your writing, or, the work that you do at Bamboo. But also now that I actually mentioned Bamboo, first, big ups on the work that you have done there so far.
Thank you so
I had
much.
a lot of material. I had a lot of public material to work with. So you guys have done a really good work, really sharing that growth, over time. But I'm gonna start right there at the beginning. I imagine you joined Bamboo at this like sweet spot of a startup where it's just starting out, and it can either be sweet or bitter, be right? Because when something's starting out, it means there's a lot of work to be done. And then there's lots of hats that you have to occupy. I know that in one of the videos that you recorded, you had mentioned that, when you had started, your team had to reach out to a marketing agency to figure out the steps that you needed to sort of take as you start out. Could you tell us why you had to do that and what that helped you do?
Thank you so much. That's a good question. So sort of like in the early days when we started Bamboo, we were working. A number of us had been there for a couple of months at the time, and we had been doing all this work on a go-to-market and how we wanted to position it and things like that. And the sense was it would be better to go to an agency that had a little bit more expertise um, in helping to bring the company to market, right? We're helping to like announce the arrival of the company. And that was kind of the predominant thinking at the time. And yeah, that's kind of what we did. So we went to work with one of the top agencies at the time, worked with them for maybe about 2 or 3 months before like that entire camping episode sort of ended. But yeah, it was a good learning experience, I think. A number of people on the team at the time. But yeah, that's kind of it.
Would you then recommend, having done that, would you then recommend that as a necessary first step if someone were to, start with a startup, or if I were to join an organization as, the first marketing person? Would you think that that's a necessary first step to make, or, there's now like multiple playbooks now that you can just use?
I think there are multiple playbooks that you can use, to be honest. It also sort of depends on the specific scenario because agencies aren't cheap, right? And so one of the problems that a lot of, startups you have, especially at those early days, is you have very, very limited resources and agencies aren't cheap. And the other thing that's the underbelly of agencies is like when you're not one of the agency's biggest clients, you don't get the agency's brightest mind. So sometimes it can be a bit penny wise, pound foolish. So I think it kind of depends on the specific context you find yourself in.
Got it. So depending on the specific context and how much resources that you have, because again, the
Yeah.
agency it's going to dedicate its best talent to you if you are the best business for them. And so you essentially came in from Helium Health, which I imagine is a health organization, and then joined, a finance organization. Would you say that there's any big difference with how marketing works in, health versus, finance?
So it's interesting because I would also answer it like this. Helium was B2B at the time and Bamboo is B2C. So there are already differences there. Generally, the differences between healthcare and finance, yes. But I think those are healthcare and finance I describe them as two of the most heavily regulated industries in the world just because of how important they are. And they are also both, they have a lot of similarities that make it similar. In certain instances, um, one, you know, is worse or better than the other. So for instance, both have a tendency to be low trust. Finance is a lot lower trust than healthcare, right? And with healthcare, and healthcare is so broad, similar with finance, right? So it depends on where you find yourself with healthcare. When I was at Helium, it's B2C. Our customers really are at the time where the administrative and medical staff members within hospitals and facilities. So those are the customers. In finance with Bamboo now, it's sort of the general public, right? So on a basic level, there are things that you could do in healthcare in that situation that you couldn't do in finance, and there's some things you could do in finance, that you can't do in healthcare. I remember in the I don't say early days in Helium because I didn't join as early. The company was already probably a couple years old by the time I got in. But we'll try and make, take content, for instance, and just a simple idea of like, you want to do a video. It was very, very difficult to get doctors to sit in front of the camera just because there is an incredible amount of work that they have to do. I remember one time we had to do a commercial at a hospital, and the chief medical director of the hospital was so incredibly gracious to let us shoot in their hospital. It's smack in the middle of the day. But even at that, it wasn't like an ideal set because you kind of kept getting moved around. Because when a patient comes and you're trying to shoot in the waiting room, you have to pause that take and go and shoot somewhere else. I guess you could say the same thing could happen if you're trying to shoot in a bank, for instance. But there are a lot of similarities, and I think there are lots of differences. It kind of depends on just where you find yourself as inside there.
Got it. So definitely context is really important. Obviously, the people that you're serving, the customers that you're serving is important, but also the context that you're working in. So in one case, working with doctors who, have tremendous things to do. And, I like to make this joke whenever I think about doctors. They're saving lives and,
Yeah,
you want to shoot your content. So just chill.
yeah, exactly.
So the next thing, and for anyone that's listening, I'm going to be referencing a couple of things here. So some of them might be work that Ugo has put out himself, whether that's in the newsletter or, YouTube. They've done a really great job of doing that. But also more recently, PCTME also put out a documentary on, their journey so far, Bamboo's journey so far. I'll link that in the show notes. So you are going to be able to access all of that. You mentioned, in some of these stories or things that you've put out that still in the early days of Bamboo, especially when, you guys got into YC, that sort of steered you guys into a position where you had to quickly experiment. And I've read, I've read your thoughts on being able to experiment, fail quickly, and then move on. During that time, what were some of the things that sort of helped you determine what to experiment and what not? And the reason I'm asking this is, from the work I've done in the past, I know how important it is to experiment and find things that work, but also you're limited by things, right? So either that's budget or resources. You don't have unlimited time, you don't have unlimited budget. Were there any sort of check boxes that you had to tick to say, okay, this is worth trying versus this is not worth trying, or this is not worth our time?
I think in that period, to be honest, it wasn't so much what did we not try, or rather, what did we try, or how did we try it? It was more so like, what didn't we? So I remember in that period, like, budget wasn't an issue because, there was no budget. Anything that requires budget, you can't do it. So you get really good really quickly about figuring stuff out that doesn't cost money. There were periods when I remember a period where, and this was COVID as well, so everyone was home and lockdown and things like that. We had like maybe a podcast on Monday, Instagram live on Tuesday, Twitter live on Wednesday, webinar on Thursday, another podcast on Friday, repeat on like you just keep trying things. At one point we had like a daily newsletter that we were writing every day, and that was sort of like opt in. We made it on Substack, so it wasn't just for our customers. You had all these different things. Yeah, what did we not do? Because you kind of have to go by fire by force, you know. And I think the idea for everything was, and this is still some of the things that guide us today, is first of all, what are we trying to achieve? That's usually the easiest thing to answer because the company should have a goal. All right. What do we want to do? This is the next thing. Why do we believe what we want to do can help us get to what we're trying to achieve? That's the next thing. All right. How are we going to do it? Okay, now we've done it. Did it work? Did it not work? If it didn't work, why didn't it work? Is there a second version of it that we can iterate on? Let's try that, So you just, come into meetings and be like, I remember there was a time I had this conversation with my manager at the time, Oge, And, we kept getting asked, like, we need new ideas. We need new ideas. And I'm like, I remember having a conversation with Ugo, like, ideas don't fall from trees. At a certain point, it just felt like at a certain point, we would have tried everything that we can possibly try. But when you reach that point, if you stay at it, you figure out another idea that you didn't think you could do before. So that was just kind of like the guiding principle at the time was, we need to figure this out and we need to figure this out quickly. So let's throw in a calculated manner everything at the wall and see what sticks.
Got it. So it looks like it's a combination of, trying out many different things and seeing what sticks, but also sort of basing that on what the company want, what's the goals that we're trying to achieve here, and why you think that this thing that you're about to try is the thing that's going to get you to the goal. And a follow-up question to that, and this might feel like I don't know whether to call it a counter or how the other ways that you might think about this is, it's often said that, for things to be successful, you have to give it time, right? You don't do things and then just leave them halfway and expecting that, and then later come and say, oh, I've tried 10 things and they were not successful. And it's like, didn't give it time to be successful. So why are you complaining that it's not successful? Is there a way that you're able to balance this where it's like, we've tried this for 7 days. It didn't really work as well. Should we wait to try it a bit more to see if there's something that sticks, or, let's just pack this up and move on?
No, I think there's a tension there, especially for young companies and marketers in positions where they need to prove themselves, where you have to figure out a way, and this is relative, to wherever you are, whatever it is that you're doing. You kind of have to figure out a way to marry the long-term necessities with the short-term necessities. And so there are very specific strategies that have no short-term impact. There are specific strategies that work better over a long period of time, but can show some short-term tracking, if you will. So this also comes down to some degree about your ability as a marketer or a marketing professional to present what it is that you want to do and what success looks like to the people who make the decision on whether you should go ahead or not go ahead. And it's easier said than done, right? But for instance, an organization that has, and I'm just going to throw this out there, like an organization that has like really short-term needs, maybe like in a fiscal quarter, right? In a month or 2 months, and you have really short-term objectives, trying to do like a PR out of home campaign may not necessarily be the most effective unless you're like pumping in millions into it, you know. So you kind of have to figure out, think of it as having like a cabinet or a drawer full of options. What are my short-term tactics? What are my medium-term tactics? What are my long-term tactics? And, they're all tools. Figuring out when to use the right tool is as important as the tool itself. You can't use a screwdriver to put a nail in wood.
So essentially, again, the context and the stage of your organization matters. We'll also try to figure out, maybe some what I would call short-term signals that tell you that this is worth even like staying on, right?
Yes.
So if you're going to stay onto something, you need to kind of try to justify it, right? And in that sense, give short-term signals that this is worth it. So we've talked about, having to try many things during that time. And I imagine that hasn't stopped, right? Bamboo still tries to experiment with things. From that time, and I'm asking this because I know that many of us marketers are very likely to be in very small companies. Like more marketers are likely to be in small companies. Your friend is starting up a company, they call you as a marketer and, you're probably supporting, or even maybe more junior people are joining companies, when they're very young, and marketers have always been expected to kind of do more, right? We have large teams with very tiny marketing person. Were there any sort of notable experiments that you think worked really well for you? Then also on the other side of it is, were there any ones where you thought would have worked much better but didn't?
I'll actually give an example. I think that sort of answers both. I think, because again, for context, Bamboo launched in November 2019, basically we launched into the pandemic. And so in the pandemic, you had a bunch of, podcasts popping up. As webinars were really cool in the pandemic. And everybody did webinars. They stopped working in 2021. And nobody announced that they no longer work. We all just figured out together and nobody wants to sit down here. Right? And events began to pick up again. Let's even just say 2022. At least by then, everybody was more comfortable with the idea of being in, relatively crowded spaces, right? So I think that's an example of something. So a lot of times I find, not every time, not most of the time, but just a lot of times, sometimes one of the things with marketing is that really good ideas, if ever they're exclusive for a short period of time. When something works, the odds are you're not the only one that had that idea at the same, at the same time. And people that didn't have the original idea with you, when they see it working, are going to copy what it is that you're doing. You take the evolution of digital ads as a concept. My favorite example is Google Ads. I don't consider Google Ads to be advertisements. I consider it to be billboard that you have to take. If not, somebody's going to take it on your head. Right. And so, but there was a time in the very early 2000s, if you were doing like digital ads, maybe not early 2000s, maybe mid to late 2000s, the first half of the 2010s, if you were really, really good, if you could over-index on digital marketing, you were outperforming most people in the industry, right? Now digital marketing is like, you need really good copy, you need really good design, you also need a really good budget because, so I think staying on top of how people consume content is as important in trying to figure out what idea is going to work now, what idea is not going to work. At least that has what we've thought about, right? But yeah, there's so many things I can't even. I mentioned earlier about how when we had a daily newsletter, it worked for about a year, and then the open rates and the engagement rates began to fall off a cliff. It became very difficult to churn that out every day as, more and more stuff, is being added and the team is not, the size you want it to be and all these different things. So you're just in that position where, for me personally, it's always constantly accessing and reaccessing what it is that we're doing and how effective it is in this time period. If it's not, I'm not, I would say like my umbilical cord is not wedded to any idea. If it's not working, it's not working. Let's cut it out. And that's kind of it.
I really do like that. And I think, many marketers are going to find themselves in this situation where it's like, this thing worked for this person, maybe we should actually let's try this thing. But it's like, are we maybe trying this thing late? Are we maybe trying this thing late? And we probably should have tried this later, and it's like kind of no longer useful. So I think this other question is, again, for every marketer, they will probably face this, which is when you work in markets, and maybe even other people outside of like marketing, other functions, they probably have this sort of experience. Is ideas get thrown at you every time. When you work in marketing, it's either you have your own ideas or someone in the team tells you this is a brilliant idea and whatnot. How do you sort of filter all of these ideas when they come in? So again, as a marketer, you are constantly thinking about your work and how you can sort of put your company in the eyes of the people that need it. But you're also getting constantly overwhelmed by outside forces. So it's either your bosses or your colleagues are sharing with you, this is a brilliant marketing idea, let us try it. How are you able to filter what's necessary to take and what's necessary to ditch and say, this is your idea, I'm not gonna pay attention to that?
So there are a couple of nuances to this. I find if you're getting 10 ideas, 7 of them sit in between. You've thought about this before, tried this before. It's just objectively stupid, right? 7 out of 10. One of those ideas is probably really good. Another idea is like halfway there, but like needs a lot of refinement and maybe you're not in the right position to be able to do it. But the general principle is you kind of have to be just open to receiving the ideas and receiving the information from people and using your skills or expertise, and in many cases, ability to iterate and experiment really quickly to validate the ideas. There are situations, for instance, you can get a really stupid idea, you still have to execute because of who said the idea, if you know what I mean. There are
Yeah.
always those cases, right? And sometimes, you want to
That
push
was going to be
push
my
back on
follow-up
it.
question.
Yeah, sometimes you want to push back on it, and sometimes you can, but sometimes, you just have to do what you have to do so that we can be like, tried it didn't work, thank you so much. Because, and I want to be fair to people as well, because marketing is one of those things, and it's not the only one, but it's one of those things where social media, for instance, one part of marketing, almost everybody's on social media. So everybody will understandably feel like they have a good idea of how social media works, and they're not entirely wrong. You know, they're not entirely wrong. But the difference between a social media manager and someone that's not a social media manager comes down to the amount of time the person that's a social media manager spends thinking about social media. And so what that looks like in real life is, if you're really good at what you do, you're a step or two steps ahead in terms of the conception of the idea, probably the iteration of the idea. So by the time the idea comes to you, it's not that it's stupid, it's just you've tried it and it didn't work. There is something to be said sometimes too for trying it again, trying it differently, right? So that's even why you can never really be closed off to the idea, because that one idea that out of 10 that's really, really good, you never get to it if you're not receptive generally to people giving you ideas.
All right, I just never went to digest that. But lesson here is, do not be closed up to to the ideas. And this is very similar. I had Ladi on the podcast, Ladi Falabi, who sort of writes for Marketing for Gigs, and she said very similar things, right? Which is, do not be quick to shut down people's ideas, right? But again, you are kind of the sort of experts in this case, where it's like you are thinking about it more than anyone else is thinking about it. So you probably know more about this idea than this person, is saying. And maybe that might even help you, I guess, improve the idea, or make the idea better with what they've shared with you. But do not be very quick to shut down the ideas. Also, keep in mind that there will be times when you just try it because of the person that's asking you
Exactly.
to try the idea. You just try it and show proof, that it's working or it's not working, and show that to them. This is still sort of around, your thinking and philosophy around marketing. So recently you shared a LinkedIn post where you said something along the lines of, marketing when done right should be forgotten. And I know, to the layman's eye, when they look at that, it's like, actually, why am I doing marketing if I want people to, if the end goal is that people forget this thing that I have done? Could you tell us a bit more about, your thinking around that?
I think what you have to go back to, what is the fundamental objective of marketing? It is to, for lack of a better term, manipulate people for business interests. And I don't use manipulate in a nefarious manner, but that is essentially what we're trying to do. And so there's a lot of intertwine between marketing and psychology, right? For those specific reasons. And so if you just think about manipulation, or persuasion, let me use a more positive, term. If you just think about those two things, they don't work when somebody knows that that's what's going on. You're not really persuaded when you are aware you are trying to be persuaded, especially if you are stubborn. The whole point of being able to manipulate someone is that they are not aware that this is what is happening. And so when you decide to do that, to persuade a group of people to change their behaviors, adjust their behaviors, or create new behaviors through all the tools that we use in marketing, they shouldn't realize that that is what has happened. And so it will be, by definition, impossible for them to remember that that is what has happened. And there are so many famous examples of this throughout history. The idea of Santa Claus and red is Coca-Cola, right? You don't think of Santa Claus and red as Coca-Cola, right? I've heard, I can't corroborate this, I've heard the idea of 3 square meal is a marketing concept. I've not looked into it. I don't know how true that is. I've just heard someone say it before, right? I know famously the idea of soap operas was an unintentional or intentional marketing initiative to, I guess in the 30s or 40s or whatever, basically sell more laundry to housewives, maybe not 30s, 60s, 70s, sell more laundry, detergents and things of that nature to housewives who would stay at home and watch daytime television. So you were pumping all these advertisements on these shows, and they gradually over time became, sort of soap operas. And there's so many examples littered through history, right? Even the idea of a luxury brand is that we now today, just call luxury. Somebody wants to sell their product at the law at a higher price, at a price that is not justifiable. So you do all these tactics, you make it exclusive, you make it only accessible to a group of people. You do that either by pricing or by location and all these different things. So when you really think about it, when you do your job really well, the key results for a marketing campaign done well is not necessarily the key results of the marketing campaign as it were. I put out an ad and the ROI, the CAC was, the CPA was whatever, it's what did it do to the business? Those things, as important as they are to us, and they are important, they have leading indicators and in some cases lagging indicators of the key objective, which is, am I helping this business move from point A to point B? Right. And that's kind of just what it comes down to.
Okay, I think that does even like that does convince me about what the message that you're trying to pass there. And I think I'm able to confidently, throw that to, other people if they try to have me explain that. So this is more about, building confidence and building that over time. In one of the, I think there was a 3-part series that you put out at Bamboo sharing, your story so far. I think this was sometime last year or 11 months ago. I can't remember the specific date. But something that really stood out to me, and I think is really core to both our culture here on this part of the continent, and I also see this reflects in, several parts of our lives. At the time, Richmond mentioned in that interview that he didn't hire someone because the person wouldn't be able to argue with him, right? And I found when I heard that, I was really excited to hear that because I think we are in a society where whoever is on top of you, you cannot question, right? And unfortunately, we find ourselves in these situations kind of everywhere around us, in churches, in the university. You cannot question anything that's above you. Right. Would you say this is a behavior you built even more at Bamboo, or you've had that before now? How have you been able to build that over time?
I think I can't take credit for that at Bamboo. It's definitely Richmond and Yamo because culture comes from the top, right? It is, as an idea, something that I am really passionate about. And I like how you touched about all the different things. I think our society in Nigeria and most parts of Africa has suffered irreparably because people can't ask questions, right? And so I'm personally like appreciative at Bamboo where you have a culture where feedback is expected. Like you're looked at with side eye if you just always agree. No, because we're here because we have different points of view. Your lived experiences, my lived experiences are different. How you perceive things, you know, is different from how I perceive things. So where I'm personally, even aside working at Bamboo, personally, I'm just very suspicious of people that just always agree with me. It's weird. I don't like it. So Richmond said that it's something like I personally relate to. It makes me very uncomfortable when one of the criteria that's very important for someone being a close friend of mine is there has to have been a period in our friendship where you have called me like out to my face. This like Ugo, this thing you didn't make sense. People that like I don't want you around me because the day I really need that advice, you're not going to say it. And I think the same is true in business because I can have a really good idea and I can bring it to, my colleagues on the marketing team. And I can say, this is my idea. This is what we're doing. And the idea is fundamentally, objectively, empirically stupid. And nobody says anything because Ugo said this is his idea. So we're doing it. But we're just wasting everyone's time. We're just wasting everyone's time. And it happens way too much in our society, in business, out of business, as you said. And I think we've suffered a lot of damage from it.
Yes, I very much agree with you. And I think this is something that I've tried to recover from over the years. So prior to working at Kibo, where it had to work with a lot of non-Nigerians, it was so strange to me that someone would ask my opinion, that someone would ask my opinion on something. But then when I started working at Kibo, we'd be in like a meeting, and then everyone's like, "Okay, Emmy, what do you think?" And it's like, "What do I think? You already thought about it, so like whatever you thought." Whatever you
Yeah.
whatever you thought is what I think. And then, as time went on, I'm so grateful for my manager where, she would ask me to give my thoughts on something before she gives her own thought, just so that her thought doesn't cloud mine and all of that. And, that sort of forced me over time to, when something is presented in front of me, I have to actually come to my own conclusion, and be able to even question things and this doesn't mean that I am cemented to that conclusion that I have arrived at, right? It doesn't mean that I'm in love with that idea. It just means that I've been able to I've been able to draw my own conclusion based on what's, I have here. And, if I do have extra information that could possibly change. I mean, I guess this is more of how to improve that over time. How do you think a junior might be able to improve that? Because frankly, most of us are still going to work with, our peers who are Nigerians,
Yeah.
and, we have already internalized that behavior where it's like, something's above you, just don't question it that much. How do you think one can still be able to, build that behavior?
I think there are lots of young people that have no qualms about giving their personal opinion, which, which is good. But I also think that where you find yourself matters as well, as you've hit the nail on the head there. There are just some places where it is in your best interest to, zip it. But if you're fortunate enough to find yourself working in a place where you can give your opinion, you are encouraged to give your opinion, I think it's a responsibility you shouldn't take for granted. So what that means is prepare. There is such a thing as a stupid opinion or a stupid point of. We just say that so that you can talk, but there is, by definition, such a thing as a stupid idea. But nobody says that in a meeting. No, nor do I. But we all know when we hear it, this idea is, you don't want to be that person where like, oh, so thank you so much, and everybody internally knows, yeah, next time don't call him, don't call her next time. So if you find yourself in that position, prepare. Take meetings seriously. Get read up notes from the previous meeting. You can even go ahead and like ask, is there an agenda for the meeting? Do we know what the meeting is going to be about? You don't always have to come in and talk. That you can give your opinion is different from being a chatterbox. There are some meetings where, or some strategy sessions or whatever, where you will talk a lot. And some where you don't need to say anything at all. It's not really about the volume of words that you're putting out. It's about the quality that you are adding to the discourse. And to do that, you need to be prepared. You need to know your stuff. And in cases where, or you need to be really good at asking the right questions. I have a wonderful colleague. We've worked together now for a couple of years. And when the first 2 years, she used to do this every time. Like, we'll be in a meeting, she'll be like, I have a question. And it became a thing in the meeting where, like, if she didn't ask a question in the meeting, I would ask, like, don't you have a question? But my point is, she asks really good questions. And so even in cases where she's not like offering an idea that iterates the strategy that we're working on, the question takes, wait, let's think about that again. Actually that might not work. So sometimes that is the case, but it's also difficult for you to ask good questions if you have no idea what we are talking about, right? And I'll add some color before I stop talking, right? When I did say there is such a thing as a stupid question, there's nuance to it. Because something else that happens in our society is you be in a room and everybody's confused, but nobody says anything because nobody wants to appear stupid. So I said that not to say you shouldn't ask the questions, that you want to ask. I said that to say the level of preparation that you want to have whenever you get in any of these rooms and spaces, you need it to be high, right? And by doing that, you almost eliminate the probability that you will be in a space asking a question that objectively you should not ask, right? And your questions, however dumb they may sound, right, are not actually stupid. They become insightful or they lead to insightful re-examination.
So I guess the crux here, or the key information here, is that you should go into things prepared to at least even if ideas that you hold, right? Because there are times that you might hold ideas, or you might want to even propose things to, a higher up. You have to be ready to see why you think that that's the thing that you should focus on. Um, Still looking at, advice for, junior colleagues. Right now, we are at a place where things are changing a lot, with technology being able to enable a lot of the work that we do. The first question is going to be, is there something that you see a lot of marketers do today that you wish, would just stop or kind of reevaluate how we're approaching it?
I think I have this joke. I'll answer the question the other way. I think we need to have a conversation about the state of Nigerian influence. It is a hot mess. It is a. So I feel like that is one thing that marketers are not talking about. And I'm not saying this to disparage influencers. I think marketers and influencers have to come and sit down and be like, because I'll try and be fair to both parties. I have heard of situations where the things that brands and marketers are asking influencers doesn't make any sense. It's not fundamentally creative, you know. And I don't know whether that has now evolved into a position where influencers just incredible geniuses when they're putting out organic content. The moment it becomes a sponsored post, all the creativity, Steph Curry inside the basket out the window, right? So I feel like that's one conversation that we're not having enough an ecosystem of creatives, on the brand and on the influencer side. On the side of like things that I feel like we should stop doing, honestly, I don't know, because we kind of have to figure this thing out. And so I don't really have much by way of like things that we should stop doing, because there's just a lot of problems that we kind of need to figure out.
That's fair. I think, it also does help with, the narrative, but also the lesson there that you don't need to have all the things figured out, but we just also need to collectively be able to say, okay, this makes sense, or this used to make sense versus not anymore, but we don't need to have anything figured out. But I really do like, somehow I do like that you say you don't know, to sort of portray the lesson that you don't always have to have, all the answers when you have the questions. Still talking about technology and the changes that are happening to careers, how do you think, and this might be an unhinged question, how do you think that technology might be changing the marketing career of late, or, in the near future?
I was having this conversation with a dear friend yesterday, and I told him I would not want to be starting out in marketing right now. Like, I wouldn't want to be starting out my career in marketing right now. I feel I started out not my first job, my second job actually, but in some ways was my first, was working at a prominent movie studio that's thankfully still around today as an intern. And I remember there were three of us that were hired. Today, I think maybe they make one hire, if at all. So two of us don't get hired, right? I think in an era and in an age where, or let me do it this way. There was a time in human history where the thing that separated those that would survive and those that wouldn't was the ability to kill, you know, physical attributes, the ability to go out, kill, bring back food, the ability that anybody threatens your household, you square it out and you are the last one standing. And we evolved for a really long period in human history where the things that separated those that were good from those that weren't was the ability to outthink and out execute anybody. I think we're at the beginning of the end of the ability to outthink, because information now is commoditized. And you're in a situation where everyone is fighting for attention. And it's not enough. Like, there's a saying I love so much: things that have never happened before happen all the time. And it's because, in part, they are just presented with shock and awe. Right. So what I believe is important right now, if you're starting, even no matter where you are, to be honest, in the career ladder in a field like ours, is your ability to execute better than anybody else. Just period, point blank. Whether you know it, whether you don't know it, your ability to execute. we are in a space where if you ask 10 people to give a strategy, 10 of them are going to use some sort of chat GPT. How do you clean that up to look better than the other 10? Not really. So the information we receive from the 10, by and large, will probably be the same. How do you present it? Is it different from everybody else? If they say all 10 should execute, how do you execute it? Is it different from everybody else? And that is very difficult to do when you are still trying to even, build a career, if you get what I mean. And so that is tricky. So something that has worked for me, and I don't know that it will work for everyone, is as much as you can, try and know a lot about a lot of things. Try and be, especially in marketing, be a generalist with the way medical doctors are trained. You pretty much do everything that you specialize, right? So that if you find yourself in a position, and it's unfortunate where companies force this on people, and so you have to do all the work because you have to do all the work, right? But that's not necessarily what I'm advocating for. You personally take it upon yourself to know a little bit about everything. And where you can even go beyond surface level. The idea is you want to have a lot of dexterity. And then you should still have that area where you excel better than most people, right? Because as you climb that career ladder in marketing, that is kind of what it comes down to. At the top, you have marketers whose greatest strengths were the ability to write, whose greatest strengths were the ability to ideate, whose greatest strengths were the ability to execute. One of the common things that all of them have is it's difficult for you to drop them in a marketing conversation and they are totally lost. They might not be able to to use a very basic example, optimize the ads the way, someone who does that morning, afternoon, night, 5-7 days a week would, but we can have a conversation. It's not lost on me what you are saying. I'm not drawing blanks. I'm asking intelligent questions, for you to clarify. So I think that's my only advice. Try and learn as much as you can and try and get really, 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 really good at one or maybe two very specific things. And you unfortunately have to do both, at the same time.
Right. So, and this has definitely come across with all the people that I've spoken to, even across different functions, right? Product, engineering, design is that feels like a very hard time to be a junior right now, and the industry is asking for more of everybody. And in the past, for a junior, that more is not what it looks like right now. So right now, it's asking for way much more, and it's kind of forcing you to be more than just a junior, really. But really, as you have shared, try to be as versatile as possible. You want to be the person that people think of when they think about, marketing in the general sense, but also know how to do one thing really well as well. So there used to be a time where, and I think maybe it's still common now, but it just depends on what stage you're at in your career, where it's like you want to be known for one specific thing. But it's very risky to want to be known for one specific thing as a junior. In fact, you might not even be known for one specific thing as a junior because, again, you're a junior. Nobody's going to trust you that well with one specific thing. So definitely try to build a lot of experience, and that might help.
So I also want to add something. Master the business that you're in. But if you work in finance, as I do, for instance, learn about finance, master finance. Put yourself in a position where, in theory, if we carried you to let's say you work in investment banking, if we put you in a deal room, you're not lost because there's a whole suite of additional value that you offer to the business, and that affects your marketing because of the in-depth understanding of the business that that you have. So that's another thing if you're a junior, and especially even if you're moving careers, because what happens is 5-10 years down the line, if you've moved around a bit, you have a very keen understanding of how finance works, for instance, how healthcare works, for instance, how media and entertainment works, for instance, how FMCGs work, for instance, in addition to the marketing knowledge that you have. It makes you stand out a bit more.
So it's not just the knowledge of the function, but also the industry that you're in, right? Okay. That's very, very, very useful because that's good knowledge that people will also want to pay for alongside the other marketing one that you have. So this is still about, AI and its impact. Is there anything that you think or that you'd have thought that AI would have been able to do better with for marketing, right? So is there any marketing function right now where you have thought, by now I would have thought you'd have been able to help us figure this out,
Prepare slides.
but it's not quite there yet.
To prepare
Say more.
slides.
Say more. You spent time.
I mean, why can't I put a prompt and you prepare my slides? I know somebody's going to say it prepares slides. Have you seen slides that, AI prepares? It's a mess. It's a mess. So, yeah, so I feel like for me, it's an annoyance. I'm like, why can't I get the slides the same way like I got, the write-up or something? Yeah,
hmm
prepare slides would be my take.
Fair. So I used to work in socials, and I always, even when we had like templates, I always wanted, an easy way to just like create other things that follow the same templates and just like do it once and move on versus having to do that all the time. So I understand with you. I really understand with you with like if you can create like a video, a 1 minute video that's looking crisp
Mhm.
now, at least slides should be at the bottom of things that you should be able to it should be able to create at this point. Well, thank you for adding that. So we are gradually approaching the end. Is there a resource that you continue to go back to that has helped you refine your craft over time?
That is a good question. I think at different points in time, there have been so many. I don't think there's one specific thing. Take and took a lot of courses on a lot of different things. So courses are helpful. Listening to other marketers talk as well is helpful. Listening to business people talk, which is interesting because they're not necessarily talking about marketing, but going back to what I was saying about understanding the business. So listening to business people like talk about like actual business. Because like I said earlier, all marketing is trying to help businesses grow. All business people try to do is grow businesses. It's, conceptually the same thing, right? Studying maybe psychology, could be helpful as well. And constantly looking at what other people are doing. Just constantly looking at what other brands. I mean, brands, in fact, outside your industry, outside the country or continent you operate in, and not a lot of people do this, but it's like the ooh, the ah, the oh, that's cool. How can I replicate that? How can I adjust that for the local context and the very limited budget that I have? Those things are creative exercises that help you arrive at different, ideas, you know, and that's kind of how I feel like what I do, some of the things that I've done, um, over the past.
Okay, so definitely consume resources, see what other people are doing, and figuring out how you can tailor that to your context. Where necessary, you can also take courses. There are lots of really good courses available. If you had to teach marketing, what's something that you must cover? Maybe you have mentioned it already, but just something you must cover if you had to teach marketing.
Do you know what is so interesting is I really don't like giving marketing advice. So I don't know if I would ever. I tried it. I have a newsletter because my fundamental assumption is like everybody has the same problem, and if I've not figured it out, they've not figured it out. If they've not figured it out, I don't know if I will figure it out. But if I had to teach marketing, I think one thing I would teach would be experimentation. It would be experimentation. I think there's a lot of humility in experimentation. It's recognizing that I do not know the answer to this question. I don't know the solution to this problem. And the best way I can do it is try a whole bunch of different things. Obviously, that's not what you say in a job interview, but that's really the job, That's really the job. So yeah,
Okay. Please don't say I don't know anything in your job interview
do not say that.
and say
Yeah.
you heard it here. Please do not say that.
That's it for now, folks. I hope you found this episode useful. Thanks for tuning in and staying till the end. Let me know what you think in the comments and who you'd like to see next on the pod. Don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe wherever you're listening from, and share with someone in your network who might find this useful. That's all for now. I'm Emmy, and I'll see you next time.